For generations, the narrative went a bit like this. Girl falls in love with boy, gets married, has children, in that order. But in 2025, people who want kids are creating families on their own terms. Like Holly. She's not married because nobody wants to put a ring on it, and yet she has 2 children and a long-term boyfriend. For those who do want kids, reproductive technology and the relaxation of social mores have turned having a family into a bit of a choose-your-own adventure, I think we can all agree. But not everybody's happy about that, which we will get to. Because these days there are options. Women are using sperm banks to become single mothers. Same-sex couples are using donors and surrogates to have children, and there are thruples raising kids and polyamorous parents. I've interviewed a few of those. And of course, this is on top of blended families. I grew up in one of those when it was pretty rare, but now it's very bog standard common. But the point is that there's no longer a set way to be a mother if you want to be. And this week, Mindy Kaling, who we last saw sitting under a balloon arch with Meghan Markle at the world's saddest children's party without any children, she has spoken about the family that she's made on the Dax Shepherd podcast. She is a writer, producer and actor, of course. She's chosen to be a single mum. She's got 3 little kids who are 7, 4 and 1, and she's kept them totally out of the public eye, even during her pregnancies, which is pretty unusual in Hollywood. We spoke earlier in the week about secret pregnancies. She kind of did that. She just sort of announced that she had the children, and she's never said who their biological father is. Here's what she said on Dax's podcast, and where she spoke about why she chose to have kids on her own.
Yeah, I felt when I was a kid, I'm definitely getting married because I love romantic love and I love men and romance, and I'm definitely going to have children. And then when I got into my 20s, and I had a couple pretty unfulfilling relationships, and then as I was in my 30s, I was like, I don't know. I knew that I wanted children, but I was old enough at that point and had enough sort of disposable income and had seen so many acrimonious divorces. I hope this doesn't sound bad, and this is not going to be relatable to a lot of listeners, but a person would have built up their career and their nest egg, and then they have a divorce and half of their money's gone.
I know. Yeah.
That should happen in most cases, and California law is a reason to protect families, and I get it. But I was like, damn, I don't want that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not that it's all about the money. And so this romantic part of me that was like, you're going to find your Darcy, was like, well, what if Darcy cheats
Takes all
on
my
me
money.
and then takes half my money? And then I have these fantasies because I'm insane, where I'm like, he's going to take half my money and his bitch wife, they'll get a fucking Fifth Avenue apartment.
So go buy all the stuff you didn't let yourself buy.
Yeah, and then with my office residuals from playing Kelly, they're going to be sending their kids to Dalton in the Upper West Side or whatever while I'm childless. Because I have revenge fantasies, not healthy at all. I was like, I don't want my money to go to this hypothetical ex and his new family.
She basically went on to say that she didn't want to compromise. So there was the fear of divorce, but then also she's saying, I didn't really want to compromise. I love my work. I love my job. I thought I've decided I had space for work and children, and that was that. And I don't want to waste my time picking out a sweater for my imaginary sister-in-law, etc.
It was a pretty bleak view. And it's interesting because she said her parents had a great marriage, but yeah, she saw the idea of a co-parent as being very much a liability.
I found it very refreshing because you don't hear women talking like that. I was driving my car when I heard her, when I was listening to that, and I wanted to pull over and make a note because I've got no memory. And because I was like, hearing a woman talk so honestly about money and not wanting to compromise and not wanting to care for someone else is just something that women don't say out loud.
I have a few friends who have decided to have babies on their own, and there are elements of that I've heard, which is just like after a series of – because if you're in your mid-30s, then you've likely had a few relationships that haven't worked, and they've gone, none of those men were fit to raise children with me. I'm so glad that I didn't have children with those men. And I think sometimes they're looking around at friends or circumstances. I know someone who recently had a baby, and at maybe 6 months, the husband walked out and she ended up doing it on her own. So women single mothers raising children have always existed.
Oh, yeah.
It's just that now it can be a choice.
But also, what I hadn't heard before is the talking about the financial the financial component, right? Because that is unrelatable, as Mindy says herself. She's like, she was in a position where she's like, I've got a fortune, I want to protect it. Now, normally that's what you hear men saying. And she's like, I want to protect my fortune, but also my fortune has afforded me choice, and I think exercising
the fortune is the key here, because I think, and I also know women who've chosen to have children without a father involved via sperm donation, and it's tough.
Very tough.
It's really tough when you are the only parent, because not only do you miss out on having a co-parent, you miss out on having the family of the co-parent. Now, that's not always a good thing, but there is certainly some safety nets and some more people involved in your child's life that you become the single point of failure in many ways.
But that's true, but that also assumes that those things are always good. You know, as you just said, it's not always good. So I think that obviously people do what they do, and money is a massive factor in this and choices. But saying, but you don't get the support assumes that everyone who's married or partnered or whatever has the support of their in-laws. Not always true.
There's a lot of married women who are raising children on their own.
Yes.
Yeah, I get that. But my point is that sometimes you might think, I don't want to have to compromise with just a partner, but there's a lot else that you don't have. My only point is that it's many hands make light work.
Yes. And
I'm not criticising those women.
I think what's interesting, and we're going to kind of get into this more, is romanticizing different visions of families, right? Because there's imperfections and constraints in really any way that you put together a family. And Miranda July, who wrote All Fours, which we loved, one of our favourite books from last year, and it was a book about a woman who was, I suppose, trying to throw off some of the shackles of motherhood and long-term monogamy. And she has this newsletter and has been sort of compiling examples of non-traditional marriages, as she calls them. And she has people write in.
Yeah, because she left, what was her story again? Just remind me, because I know the book, but it mirrored her life a little bit, because she was married to a man, had a child.
I think they might have opened up their relationship.
Yeah, so the plot in All Fours, if you haven't read it, it's not a linear divorce plot, and nor is what she's exploring it through her newsletter, is it's this idea of different models of family. So she didn't leave, she stayed, but they opened up their relationship and she started exploring relationships with women, which she'd had in the past. And he got a girlfriend, but they stayed a family unit for a period of time, and then that changed. And what she does through her Substack is she encourages other people living in non-traditional families to share their stories, and they're really varied, right?
They're really, really varied. So one example is ethical non-monogamy. So that's when, for example, there's a woman who writes in and she's queer. She's in a long-term relationship with a man, but she explores that other part of herself while still being married. There's also something called poly-solo, which I hadn't heard, and that is when a few of the women write about the man they're with having affairs and they don't mind. They're not in a sexual era and they just go, I'm happy to be on my own and you do what you need to do. Spousal caregiver. This was another one. So there was one who wrote in about her husband's illness. So this seems to be not entirely uncommon when you're in a relationship and maybe that relationship is fractured or you're thinking about ending it and life throws you a really serious diagnosis. And the amount of women who stay with them because they know that when you are nearing the end of your life, you really, really need people. There were others that were in the midst of a breakup when the LA fires happened. And so that emergency meant that there was almost like a trauma bond, like they had to stay together. Another example was nesting or living apart together. So, and this is also about finances and like
Loads of couples do that.
Yeah. I knew of families
Are they
who did
not
this.
together, but they just take it in turns, like in Strife?
Some
or
do.
they stay living together.
Or they stay
but
living
just not
together.
as a
That's right.
romantic couple.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So,
I see.
in fact, it was a child who wrote in and said, growing up, my parents were split, but they were amicable and they lived in the same house. One was upstairs, one was downstairs. They even had other relationships. Someone would come in, someone would leave, but they lived in the same house. And what I found reading about these, I thought chances are that these sorts of arrangements have existed for a lot longer.
100%.
Then-
I think they've always been around. But
They've
now
always been around.
Now we can give them cute little names.
Yep.
And also now, in some circles at least, you can talk about it. Because I think you're 100% right. There have always been couples who can't afford to separate but stay living together until the kids leave home. There have always been couples who choose not to live together but stay in a relationship, because that's another thing here, was like long distance, or we're dating but we have separate houses, or we're committed but we have separate houses. There have always been women or men who will turn a blind eye or actively engage in the idea that their partner's having sex with someone else because their familial bond is the most important, and that they're entirely bonded together through sickness and health and all of the things that go along with having a family, but they're not romantically in love anymore. All of that, I think, has always existed. But now it feels like we're allowed to maybe whisper it a little bit louder.
Unsurprisingly, this has given way to somewhat of a moral panic. So
calm down.
there are some people looking at this going, are we presenting women with an unrealistic fantasy of novelty, of life being about sort of multiple sexual partners, as though that doesn't come with its own issues? Freddie DeBoer, who we've talked about on this show before, wrote a newsletter about Miranda July. And he basically argued that this fantasy version that Miranda July is selling people doesn't actually exist for anyone. And he said that in 2025, what the media sells is permission. And that's what women are looking for, permission.
What does that mean? And how does it not exist? Because women are literally describing their families and their unconventional setups.
But what his theory is that the people subscribing to this newsletter and reading it are in traditional marriages, looking for permission to leave, to change that, to evolve that marriage. I would say...
What's wrong with that?
Well, he's basically suggesting this is contagious, and if you think that your life is going to be easier when you leave, it's not. And you're chasing this fantasy that doesn't exist. That's the thing about fantasies.
That's very patronising.
I would argue that the fantasy is actually the other way around. I think that
I agree.
What this is giving a whispered voice in some very small corners that the fantasy that we've all been sold since the day we first put a little bridal veil on or a baby doll, that you will meet someone, you will fall madly in love, we will follow this timeline, you will stay together forever, you will always be obsessed with them, you will always want to have lots of sex with them, they will always treat you really well and you will always treat them really well and you'll always feel fulfilled. That is a fantasy we have had shoved down our throats forever.
Yeah.
That's the fantasy. Because not most, but a lot of relationships are not that neat. Not to say they're not good or they're not fulfilling or they're not exciting but they're not that neat. This is speaking more to the messy reality, but it unnerves people because it's like, oh, so we're not pretending anymore? We're not just going along with like, I know he sleeps with other people, but no one could ever find that out because it would be so humiliating for me. This is more of women saying like, maybe that's what we have to do to stay together and maybe it's not humiliating for me.
What's interesting to me is to explore whether, and of course it's different for every person, whether people are doing this for themselves or for their kids, or it's a combination of both. And by that I mean whether they're finding ways to give their children a sort of a family experience, and maybe it is staying with the father or the co-parent of that child, and that it's putting good for the children, or whether it's I just need to live my life beyond my identity as just a parent and I'm not fulfilled and that's the most important thing. And I'm sure it's a bit of both.
It is. And I think with De Boer, and I find his writing interesting, I found this to suggest that the contagion exists within women leaving is almost comical, because the contagion is staying. Like, I think that's where people feel the pressure most of all. And happy women are not leaving their marriages.
Spoken like a man who's worried that his wife's going to get ideas.
Happy women are not reading a newsletter and going, oh, lots of sex and leaving my children. That is not how women's minds work. Like, I think that if you've been in a marriage for a lot of years and you're going, I'm not happy, then exploring what other options look like can feel empowering. And in one of Miranda July's emails, she kind of had things to consider about before blowing up your life, because she says you can blow up your life, or maybe you're not ready to do that. Like, maybe here are some things to consider. And she has this line, which is, keep an eye on death and who you want to be as you near it. And this suggested to me, is there something about the kind of later in life shift in marriages and in relationships where people are looking around and going, this isn't how I want to spend.
I think that's 100% true. I interviewed a woman on Mid for an episode we did called Who Cares Who You Sleep With? And this woman had been married. She was 40. She'd been married for a while. And in her early 40s, she had a child. She came out as bisexual. And the people around her were all like, why would you do that? Like, why would you tell people? Why would you feel a need to come out as bisexual? Like, who cares about you? What does it matter what you want? Like, just if you want to do that, just do that. But don't like tell people. And she was like, well, who cares? I care. You know, she's like, don't I get to be me? Like, when I agreed to get married and have a child, did I also agree? And some people would say absolutely yes, to your point before about self-expression, that all my needs and who I really am is then frozen in time and also is a shameful secret, or am I allowed to evolve and change? And she said people, in the same way that people might say to a teen who is talking about their sexuality, oh, it's a phase, she said everyone said to her it's a midlife crisis.
Oh.
And it's really interesting ways that we dismiss people's feelings and say, you'll get over that. And she was like, but I don't want to live the rest of my life pretending to be someone I'm not.
It's true, because women have always been not just encouraged but expected to subjugate our own identities and our own desires and be mother first.
And there's a part of that that's essential, right? But
it's interesting. I interviewed Rowan Mangan on No Filter a number of years ago, and she was part of a throuple, and she fell in love with these two women who had been married for a really long time, Martha Beck and her wife Karen, and they had adult children, and Rowan was sort of a generation younger, and the three of them entered into a committed relationship, and Rowan wanted to have a baby, and she had this baby, and she spoke a lot about, we don't know how anyone does it with less than three wives. Like, we often say to each other, God, she's like, you know, the child, I'm at work and the child's sick at daycare and one person picks up the child and the other person's doing something. And she talks about this. It does sound pretty utopian, to be honest. And I love this idea of, you know, you can't be what you can't see. And I love that there are so many more models. But I also think that just like you can't be what you can't see, I think you don't know what parenting is going to be like until you become one. And I think that while on paper it can look great in terms of I don't have to compromise, I don't have to share my money, but it's harder. It can be harder than it looks. And I'm not saying that in any condescending way. I know that from single mothers that say that.
Yeah, and I think that there's probably, you know, to be wary of being too flippant about the single mother transition. Like Missy Higgins has spoken about, I'm no longer with my children's dad, and this is not where I want to be. This is really, really hard.
No.
Yeah.
And I think that there would be a lot of single mothers who maybe see some of these stories or listen to some women who might have more resources than they do and think, this isn't a fantasy, this is really, really hard. I don't have support. I don't have respite.
100%.
I feel isolated.
Like renting a family home on your own in anything close to a city is almost impossible.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand of that, it's always been the case that finances play a large part in why couples stay together. And so saying
Often
all of
for
those
worse,
things
yeah.
out loud is interesting.